Welcome to our podcast today. Today we are going to be discussing materials that are found in Mosiah chapters 11 through 24. And you know, one of the most challenging parts, I feel, of the Book of Mormon is perhaps following the chronology that is actually found in our reading material today, in chapters 11 through 24. In these 13 assigned chapters, it's actually very easy to get lost in the comings and goings of various groups of people, migrating from here to there and everywhere. I thought perhaps part of our podcast today, we would spend a little bit of time, dedicate a little time to sorting through these various migrating groups and trying to put them in some sort of a timeline. There's not a lot of dates given, but I think there's enough stuff that we can assemble a reasonable picture of who went where and why. And we need to begin our discussion of the timelines found in Mosiah's chapters 11 through 24 with the book of Ammon. Now, this picture here represents the waters of Mormon, and we'll talk a little bit about Alma and his 450 righteous followers and the baptisms that took place there. But we're going to begin in the book of Ammon, and we're going to want to read from Ammon 1:5. And in Ammon 1:5, it says that, behold, it came to pass that 320 years had passed away. And that would place Ammon, who was the record keeper at that time, with the small plates of Nephi, to about 280 BC. Now, Ammon passed the record, if you'll remember from our past reading, to his brother Chemish, and then Chemish passed the record on to Abinadom, his son, and Abinadom passed the record on to Amaleki. And Amaleki is kind of an important guy to us. There's a little bit of chronology there. It was during the time of Amaleki that we have our first group that departed, and that would be about 200 BC. And in Ammon 1:12 it says, behold, I am Amaleki, the son of Abinadom. Behold, I will speak unto you somewhat concerning Mosiah. For behold, he being warned of the Lord that he should flee out of the land of Nephi, and as many as would hearken unto the voice of the Lord should also depart out of the land with him into the wilderness. All right, so we have our first migrating group. We'll call him Mosiah the elder. And he took as many would follow him into the wilderness. They eventually, after wandering for some time through the wilderness, found a land and a people called Zarahemla. There, Mosiah's group joined with these people of Zarahemla, and these are the Mulekites, and Mosiah was anointed king over this entire group. Now, a quick note about the Mulekites. The Mulekites, this earlier migrating group, Mulek, a son of Zedekiah, king of Judah, led a group from Jerusalem about 587 BC and came to America. Now, they left about the same time as Lamhi did, like ships passing in the night. Well, about the time the people of Mulek came to America, they came across a man named Coriantumr. And he was the last of another migrated group of people called the Jaredites. And the Jaredites' time frame we do not have on this particular timeline, but they're 2200 BC to 600 BC, and that's when this last Jaredite man, Coriantumr, was found by the Mulekites. He stayed with the people of Mulek for 9 months. All right, enough on the Mulekites. Let's go back to Amaleki. Amaleki was born actually during the days of Mosiah the elder, and he lived to see Mosiah's death, and he lived to see his son Benjamin reign in his stead. And it was during the lifetime of Amaleki, perhaps about 180 BC, that a second migration took place. In Ammon 1:20 and 20, Ammon 1:27 and 28, it says, a certain number who went up into the wilderness to return to the land of Nephi, and there was contentions among them, and they were slain, save 50 in the wilderness, and they returned again to the land of Zarahemla. So a group of people left Zarahemla to return to the motherland, and contended one with another, slew one with another, and 50 of them returned. So that's another migrating group. Well, again, during the lifetime of Amaleki, a third migration took place, another group seeking to return, of all things, to the land of Nephi-Lehi. And that was about 175 BC. Apparently, the motherland, the land of Nephi, seemed to have a great draw on the heartstrings of the Nephites. They continually are wanting to return there, even though it's occupied by the Lamanites. Now, the leader of this particular group of people, this third migration, was a man by the name of Zeniff. He was the leader, and these people actually made it to the land of Lehi, Nephi. And they negotiated with the Lamanites that were there and given possession of the land of Lehi, Nephi, and the land of Shalom. In Mosiah 10:3 it says, "We did inherit the land of our fathers for many years, yea, and for the space of 22 years. Well, that puts our timeline to about 155 BC with Zeniff. Now, Zeniff died, and his son Noah took over in his stead, and he led his father's people into wickedness. After some time, a prophet shows up on the scene, a guy by the name of Abinadi, and he initially was rejected by the people, but after the space of 2 years, he came back to the people again and continued to preach. He preached until he was brought before wicked King Noah and his wicked high priest. And eventually, as you know in your reading, Abinadi was sentenced to death by fire. However, prior to being burned to death, his testimony converted Alma, one of Noah's high priests. Now, that's going to lead to another migrating group. Alma fled from the king and continued the work of Abinadi at the waters of Mormon, which this picture kind of portrays in the background. King Noah sent an army to destroy Alma and his 450 followers, and our fourth migration then followed. As Alma and his followers then fled into the wilderness, they settled at a place called Helam, Helam, Helam. It's named after the first convert baptism, a fellow by that name that Alma baptized at the waters of Mormon sometime earlier. And so Alma's migration was about 147 BC. Well, after Alma fled, then the Lamanites came upon the people of King Noah. Well, Noah took off as high priest fled too. The Lamanites then put the people of Zeniff, into bondage and required a tribute of 1/2 of all that they had. The new king, since Noah had fled, would be a son of Noah, a righteous man named Lamhi. And Lamhi would live in peace for 2 years, or until about 145 BC. Now our story is going to kind of bounce around just a bit here. We now need to shift back to Zarahemla, where an aged King Benjamin is giving his famous, I call it a temple sermon. If you haven't seen the podcast I did prior to this one, you need to watch it. One of the most important podcasts I think I've done so far this year is the temple sermon of King Benjamin. Anyway, this happened about, and then we've moved forward on our timeline. King Benjamin is about to pass away, and he's going to give the kingdom to his son Mosiah. We'll call him Mosiah the Younger, and this all happens at about 121 BC. And then our last prophet keeper, Amaleki, who we talked about a few minutes ago, he's going to hand off the small plates of Nephi to King Benjamin, who will then give them to his son, Mosiah the Younger. In fact, King Benjamin gives the brass plates, Amaleki's small plates of Nephi, the sword of Laban, and the Liahona. These are all of what it takes to become the new king, and Mosiah the Younger will have all these things. Now, at the bottom, you see we got Mosiah, King Benjamin, and Mosiah the Younger, and it's all the way through to 121. Well, we're still basically at 145 BC with our initial timeline. So back to Lamhi. After being put in servitude for many years, the people of Lamhi decide they're going to try and fight their way out of bondage. Remember, half of all they have goes to the Lamanites, and so 3 different times they came against the Lamanites to try and break free of this bondage, and 3 different times they were defeated. And so that kind of pushes our timeline closer to 121 BC. We're now on kind of a parallel track, as you can see, with Mosiah and Lamhi. Well, our fifth migrating group is going to be only 16 strong. It seems that Mosiah the Younger decided he wanted to find out what happened to the people of Zeniff that left some 50 years earlier. And so 16 strong men led by Ammon go to try and find out where they went or what happened to them. They actually found the people of Lamhi and helped them plan an elaborate scheme involving liquor and intoxication to escape their bondage. And this kind of brings us to our sixth migrating group, and that would be Lamhi and Ammon. They're fleeing in the wilderness, and under the direction of Ammon, they finally return home, you might say, to Zarahemla. And again, this is about 120 BC. Both lines are now concurrent with one another. In Mosiah 22:16, it says, "The Lamanites pursued after them for 2 days, but could no longer follow their tracks. Therefore," this Lamanite army that was pursuing after Lamhi and Ammon, they're lost in the wilderness. They get lost in the wilderness. And unfortunately, these lost Lamanites find the people of Alma at Helam. In their wanderings, they had also found the wicked priests of King Noah. Noah having been killed earlier, burned by his own priests, perhaps in the wilderness, as prophecy had said. Well, so this Lamanite army has come across the wicked priests of Noah, but they're impressed with these guys because they ended up marrying Lamanite daughters, and they put them in authority positions. And now as they've come across and put into bondage Alma at Helam, they place these wicked priests as the instructors or overseers over Alma and his people. And all this happened about 120 BC. However, shortly after, the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall on the Lamanites, and Alma and his people escaped. And after 12 days of wandering in the wilderness, they also arrive at the land of Zarahemla. Quote, "And King Mosiah received them with joy." Well, this constitutes the migration now of 7 groups in our reading. And for all intents and purposes, by 120 BC, Lamhi and Ammon arrived in Zarahemla, and Alma and his people arrived in Zarahemla. So we have a huge influx of new faces at Zarahemla. Now, one of the themes of the Book of Mormon is that of unity and gathering. Perhaps this description found in Mosiah best describes the unity of the gospel, found in Mosiah 18:21. "They should look forward with one eye, having one faith and one baptism, having their hearts knit together in unity, in love one to another." All right, so we've discussed these 7 migrating groups, and I hope that was a little bit helpful for you as you read through these chapters and try and follow who went where and why. I'd now like to turn to a theme that I see is prevalent throughout these migrating groups that we've just discussed. The theme is pride and humility. Let me begin with an example of pride. This is Lamhi and his group, and it's Mosiah chapter 11, verses 19. And this is actually before Lamhi. This is Noah. Okay, so it says relative to pride, and now because of this great victory that they lifted up in the pride of their hearts, they did boast in their own strength, saying that their 50 could stand against thousands of the Lamanites, and thus they did boast and did delight in blood, and in the shedding of the blood of their brethren, and this because of the wickedness of their king and priest. Well, again, you can recognize who they're talking about is wicked King Noah and his priests. The Doctrine and Covenants tells us that the Book of Mormon is a record of a fallen people. But you might ask, why did they fall? And Mormon gives that answer in the closing chapter of the book, and these are his words. "Behold, the pride of the nation, or the people of the Nephites, hath proven their destruction. Behold, the pride of this nation, or the people of the Nephites, hath proven their destruction. And again in DC 38, verse 39, beware of pride, lest ye become as the Nephites of old. Pride was the downfall of the Nephite nation. In the premortal council, it was pride that caused Lucifer to fall. And at the end of the world, God will cleanse the earth by fire, and the proud will be burned as stubble, we're told. Well, let me share with you a few thoughts taken from a conference address many years ago by President Ezra Taft Benson. He addressed this subject of pride and humility. Most of us think of pride as self-centered and conceitful, boastful, or arrogant. However, the central core of pride is enmity. Enmity towards God and our fellow men. And you might ask, well, what is enmity? Enmity is defined as hatred toward, hostility towards, or a state of opposition against. Pride is essentially competitive in nature. We pit our pride, or our will, I might say, against God's will. That's what pride is. The proud cannot accept authority, any authority, especially the authority of God in their lives. The enmity takes on various labels as perhaps hard-heartedness, stiff-necked, puffed up, or easily offended. Now, a major portion of this prevalent sin of pride is enmity towards our fellow men. We are tempted daily to elevate ourselves above that of others. The proud man is an adversary to God. I like what C.S. Lewis says. He said, pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. And in the pre-earthly council, as I mentioned, Lucifer placed his proposal in competition with that of the Lord, and he wished to be honored above all others. He was pridefully desiring to dethrone God, literally. In Proverbs 16:18, it says, pride goeth before destruction. Well, as I mentioned, it destroyed the Nephite nation, and it was pride that crucified Christ. The Pharisees were angry because Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, which would put a threat, of course, to the position of the Sadducees and Pharisees, and so they plotted his death. The proud stand more in fear of man's judgment than they do of God's judgment. King Noah was about to free the prophet Abinadi, but an appeal to his pride by his wicked priest sent Abinadi to the flames. Herod sorrowed at the request of his wife to behead John the Baptist, but his prideful desire to look good in front of those who sat with him caused him to kill John. When pride has hold of our hearts, we lose our independence to the bondage of men's judgment. The world shouts louder than the whisperings of the Spirit. Pride is a sin that can be easily seen in others and is rarely admitted to in ourselves. Most of us consider pride to be a sin of those on top, such as the rich and learned who look down on us. There is, however, a far more common ailment among us, and that is pride from the bottom looking up. It manifests itself in many ways, such as fault-finding, gossiping, backbiting, murmuring, envying, and being unforgiving and jealous. A proud person hates the fact that someone is above him. Pride results in secret combinations. They're built up, obviously, to get gain and get power. Pride brought down both the Jaredite and the Nephite civilization and has been and will yet be the cause of the fall of many more nations, I fear. Another face of pride is contention. Contention in a family drives the Spirit of the Lord away. The Scriptures tell us in Proverbs 13:10, only by pride cometh contention. Well, the pride, the people that have pride or are proud are not those who receive correction easily. They depend upon the world to tell them their value. Pride says, if you succeed, well, then I have failed. Pride is a damning sin in every sense of the word. It limits or stops our progression. The proud are not easily taught. They will not change their mind. After all, that would infer that they had been wrong. Pride separates and divides. Unity is impossible with a proud people. Pride is a universal sin and a very great vice. Now, the antidote to pride is humility. So here's the people of Lamhi. This is after Noah's long gone. And they're put into bondage. And this is what it says in part of our reading in Mosiah 21. It says, "And they did humble themselves even to the dust, subjecting themselves to the yoke of bondage, submitting themselves to be smitten and to be driven to and fro, and burdened according to the desires of their enemy. And they did humble themselves, even the depths of humility, and they cried mightily to God. Yea, even all the day long did they cry unto their God, that he would deliver them out of their afflictions." That's a great couple of scriptures with regards to humility. And the people of Alma also were very humble. In Alma chapter 24, again, part of our reading, it says, "And it came to pass that so great were the afflictions, they began to cry mightily to God. And Ammon commanded them that they should stop their cries." Ammon, again, one of the wicked high priests of King Noah, put in charge by the Lamanites over the people of Alma that they had just come across and subject them to bondage. That's Ammon. "And he put guards over them to watch them. And whosoever should be found calling upon God should be put to death. And Alma and his people did not raise their voices to the Lord their God, but did pour out their hearts to him. And he did know the thoughts of their hearts. And it came to pass that the voice of the Lord came to them in their afflictions, saying, Lift up your head and be of good comfort, for I know of the covenant which ye have made unto me, and I will covenant with my people and deliver them out of bondage." Two very, very good examples of humility amongst people. Let me share a thought with you with regards to the empowerment of humility. Humility and gratitude are two characteristics of happiness. A story is told of an encounter between Brigham Young and Joseph Smith. In the presence of a rather large group of brethren, the prophet severely chastised openly Brigham Young for failing in his duty. Well, everyone was stunned and waited to see what Brigham's response would be. After all, Brigham, who later became known as the Lion of the Lord, was no shrinking violet by any means. Excuse me. Brigham slowly rose to his feet, and in the words that truly reflected his character and his humility, he simply bowed his head and said, "Joseph, what do you want me to do?" The story goes that a sobbing Joseph then ran from behind the podium, threw his arms around Brigham and said, "You passed. Brother Brigham, you passed." Humility is often misunderstood and considered a weakness. There are not many work applications that have a check mark or a box that says, "Are you a humble person?" In the kingdom of God, however, greatness begins with humility. In giving the requirements for membership in the church, in Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord said, "All those who humble themselves before God and come forth with broken hearts and contrite spirits, these are the ones who shall be received by baptism into his church." I love this picture of President Nelson. Within the membership of the church, we see prominent business executives graciously and humbly being taught by a humble teacher. We see highly educated individuals following counsel given them by an uneducated bishop. We see former leadership of the church accepting calls to teach in the primary or to teach in the nursery. We see thousands of humble couples leaving the comforts of their home to serve as missionaries throughout the world. King Benjamin warned that we must become as a child, submissive, meek, humble, patient, full of love, willing to submit to all things which the Lord sees fit to inflict upon us. Mosiah 3:19. Humbly submitting our will to that of the Father's brings us this empowerment that I'm alluding to and talking about. The empowerment to meet life's afflictions and adversities, the power of peace in our families and in our own mind, the power of hope for something better amongst a difficult world, and the power of a loving heart, such as the Savior had. In fact, the Savior is our supreme example of the power of humility. After all, his willingness to obey the Father brought about the greatest and most powerful event in all of history. Perhaps some of the most sacred words in all of Scripture is simply, "Not my will, but thine be done." I want to thank you for joining us today for our podcast. I hope the timeline that I put up of the migrating groups of people found in our reading material there in Mosiah made some sense to you and perhaps helped you just a little bit keep things in order. And I hope that this little discussion we've had on pride and humility has perhaps given you renewed strength and a desire to seek the empowerment of God that He gives to those that are humble. Now, our next podcast is going to be covering chapters 25 through 29, or the rest of the book of Mosiah, and then the first 4 chapters of Alma. And for those of you counting weeks, it would be weeks 22 and 23 in your Come Follow Me manual. I want to thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time.